Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on the Potomac Watch podcast with my colleagues Kim Strassel and Bill McGurn. And as I said earlier, the two of you listened to at least some of the Christopher Wray hearing on Wednesday in front of the Judiciary Committee. I did not, I must admit, listen to that. I read much of the coverage. And by all accounts, it seemed that Mr. Wray, the FBI director, was pretty much like Muhammad Ali in his prime. Rope-a-dope, not letting anybody hit him to mar that countenance with bruises. Kim, what do you think?
Yeah, it was really something remarkable. I mean, the number of times that he said, well, I don't have that information at my fingertips, and we'll come back and give you a briefing on that later in a more classified situation, or we're not done with that review, or I can't comment on an ongoing investigation. That was pretty much all he did the entire committee hearing. And, this is not necessarily unusual. I think sometimes people forget. They look at the FBI director and they think of the kind of noble head of the law enforcement community. And they forget that these guys, if you make it to the top of the FBI, it's because you've been in Washington a long time and you get the politics. Jim Comey was a master of this when he came in to do these congressional briefings. And Christopher Wray is proving himself a very significantly capable successor to him in terms of not having to answer the questions. Now, the fact that he wouldn't answer some questions, I think also was revealing on some key topics. And we can go through some of those. But the Republicans were really focused on what I would call the sort of scandal cases and the FBI. And those were the ones that he was most reticent to give information on that he could have provided in an open setting, but chose not to.
Let's listen to Jim Jordan, the committee chairman, talk about how the FBI handled the Hunter Biden laptop.
Even after Facebook specifically asked whether the laptop story was Russian disinformation, the FBI refused to comment, resulting in social media companies' suppression of this story. And as a result, millions of our fellow citizens did not hear the story prior to the November 3rd, 2020 election. Additionally, the FBI was included in industry meetings, bilateral meetings, received and forwarded alleged misinformation to social media companies, and actually misled companies in regard to the laptop story. When the court says the FBI misled, that's a nice way of saying they lied.
Now, let's also listen to Representative Mike Johnson ask Mr. Wray to define disinformation, following up on the Jim Jordan line of questioning.
The FBI made the social media platforms pull that information off the internet if it came from conservative sources. They did this under the guise that it was disinformation. Can you define what disinformation is?
What I can tell you is that our focus is not on disinformation, broadly speaking.
Well, wait a minute. Yes, it is. Wait a minute.
Can I answer the question?
You can in a minute. Your star witness said in the litigation, Elvis Chan, who's in charge of this, said they do it on the basis of disinformation. We need a definition of what that is.
Our focus is on malign foreign disinformation. That is, foreign hostile actors who engage in covert efforts to abuse our social media platforms, which is something that is not seriously in dispute.
I have to stop you for time. That's not accurate.
Bill, of course, this was a focus of the hearing in part because the federal judge recently ruled, Judge Terry Dowdy, that the FBI and other agencies had collaborated with tech platforms to censor certain kinds of content and barred the agencies from dealing with those platforms again. And they were trying to pin the FBI director down on what they did. But again, the questioning kind of came up empty.
Yeah, but I think Mike Johnson did the best questioning of the day. He clearly read the judge's opinion, which also included a preliminary injunction on the FBI and other government agencies from contacting social media about content. And he was very good at not letting Mr. Wray get away with things that are false. In fact, at one point, he said, you need to read this court opinion because you're in charge of enforcing it. And he pointed out, as the judge found, this was not limited to foreign sources. This was ordinary citizens who had their speech oppressed. And the judge said the government was behaving like an Orwellian ministry of truth. So to me, Wray's answers were inexplicable because he didn't come across as a clever Washington lawyer. To me, he looked like someone who is unprepared.
Yeah, that's interesting. Kim, the Republicans are clearly frustrated with the FBI, and yet it's almost certainly very bad politics to say we're going to defund the FBI, just play into Democratic hands as the way defund the police did for Democrats, playing into Republican hands politically. What can they do? What are they thinking about doing to try to get an FBI that is less, in their view, partisan and less willing to enter the political campaigns, as we saw they did in both 2016 and 2020, to very ill effect?
Just to your point, too, Paul, on playing into Democratic hands, that was a big theme of yesterday's hearings. There were numerous times when Democrats teed up Christopher Wray to talk about just what bad things would happen across the nation if Republican plans to defund the FBI were to happen. And by the way, he had long lists of those. He was very voluble when it came to those questions, gave very long answers. But I think one of the things that Republicans are beginning to realize, and a theme that is emerging from this, is that where the FBI has gone off the rails in so many situations is when central headquarters decides that it's going to take over an investigation or make decisions and take that power away from field offices. And, the reality is if you look out at what the day-to-day of 35,000 FBI agents out in these field offices, they do some really important work, obviously, in combating cyber attacks and going after fentanyl rings and child exploitation and foreign terrorism. So there's a lot that's happening good on the ground. But the scandals that we've had are things like the Russia collusion hoax, where the Federal Bureau of Investigation decided to run that out of DC, and there was nobody up the line that was imposing any questioning or pushback on those sort of things. And so they made some very bad judgments. Other thing that came out, which was interesting, is how the FBI, to a certain extent, is also held hostage by bad decisions or political decisions by the DOJ. There was a very interesting line of questioning yesterday in which Republicans were asking Wray about this memo that Merrick Garland put out suggesting that parents who went to school board meetings could be violent aggressors. And Wray acknowledged, he said, to his knowledge, the FBI did not have any evidence that there was a violent threat from parents, and basically left the impression that he didn't know if that memo was such a great idea. He was following orders. So I think Republicans still have a lot more work to do to figure out what they want to propose concretely to change the FBI. But some of it does seem to be about leadership, or maybe creating some sort of reforms that devolve more of what happens out the door instead of allowing these political people in DC to have so much authority.
Some people talking about cutting the FBI's budget, even if not totally defending it, or cutting Christopher Wray's salary. Those things strike me as mistakes politically. Also, Republicans talking about not renewing so-called 702 surveillance power, which is authority that Congress granted the federal government after the 9/11 attacks, which allows surveillance of foreign sources and sometimes can wrap in Americans as well if they are part of, and just by dint of the breadth of the surveillance. I think, Bill, this is a vital tool, anti-terrorist tool, and I'd be very wary of having that not renewed. I think it would create a vulnerability we don't need to create, and the terror threat has not gone away, as we all know, and yet I think there's momentum on the right and the left not to renew that authority.
Yeah, there's a lot of momentum because people are frustrated, and Mr. Wray didn't help this case then. Some of them are talking about building the FBI headquarters, the new headquarters they want, but doing it in Alabama and taking it down there. So,
well, do you think that will clear out a lot of the Washington crowd? They would
I
want
don't
to move
know.
there?
It might be if they can't go to their favorite restaurants and so forth. That's why I think Christopher Wray was such a disappointment. If he had damaged only his own reputation, okay, we can live with that. But what he said and how he evaded answers, I don't know. Basically, I'm not answering your question. It's likely to have consequences that are more damaging for the American people.